So it was almost 6 months to the day that I taught Judges chapter 1. It was October 25th of last year. I taught Judges chapter 1, and now here we are 6 months later. I'm teaching Judges chapter 21, the last book. Now, the events in Judges, they spanned some 300, 400 years. All of the events that we read about in Judges, about a 300, 400, between 300 and 400 year span. A repeated phrase that we hear all throughout the book. There was no king in Israel, and what did they do? They did what was good in their own eyes, right? That's exactly right. We hear that over and over again. So the last 5 chapters of this book, they're a little bit different, right? They don't deal with a specific judge in the last 5 chapters. One person that I was reading said that it's more of an appendix to the book of Judges, right? Chapter 17, we have Micah's idolatry. Chapter 18, the Danites, they decide to move and pick up Micah's idolatry. And in 19, 20, and 21 are kind of tied together as one story. Where we left off last week is Israel has just had a civil war within the nation, right? What tribe did they go against? What was the bad tribe? Do we know? Benjamin, right? It was the tribe of Benjamin. So Judges chapter 21 is what happens after all of this damage has already been done. One thing to keep in mind is that this chapter is not about righteous people making good choices. It's about a broken nation trying to fix the disaster that they created, that they brought upon themselves. One important thing to recognize is in Judges 21, is that God's mercy is present even when it's not explicitly stated, right? The chapter itself doesn't show God giving instructions or directly intervening, yet the outcome reveals his plan. The tribe of Benjamin is preserved. The nation of Israel continues as 12 tribes. This is significant because God has made promises regarding Israel, and those promises were not dependent on perfect human behavior. Even though the people acted rationally, they acted emotionally, and throughout the entire book sinfully, God didn't abandon his plan. God's mercy works in ways that are quiet and powerful. What? He works in mysterious ways. You're exactly right. That's exactly right. In this case, God's mercy is seen in the preservation. The people of Benjamin deserve consequences for their actions, right? But they were not completely cut off. This reminds us that God's mercy doesn't mean that there's no consequences for our action, but it does mean that failure is not the end of God's plan. God continues to work even when people, us, fall short. So let's get started. We're going to read verses 1 through 3. We're in Judges chapter 21. Read verses 1 through 3. Now the men of Israel had sworn an oath at Mizpah, saying, "None of us shall give our daughter to Benjamin as a wife." Then the people came to the house of God and remained there before God until evening. They lifted up their voices and they wept bitterly and said, "O Lord God of Israel, why has this come to pass in Israel, that today there should be one tribe missing?" They're asking God why this happened. What we see here is the Israelites have made a rash, emotional oath. We're not giving Benjamin any of our daughters because of how bad they were. right? But now they regret it. The people gather before the Lord, and they weep, they cry out, but something is missing, right? Something's missing. There's no repentance. They feel the weight of this situation, but they're not taking responsibility for how they got there. They don't take any responsibility for what they've done, right? Did they go to God in chapter 20? Did they go to God and say, what should we do with the Benjamites? That was not what they did, right? They went to God and said, we've made this decision. Who do you want to go first? Right? They didn't say, what should we do? They said, we're doing this. Who do you want to go first? Right? Now they're weeping and say, oh, how did this happen? How could this have happened to us? Right? Now they regret it. Now they feel the weight of the situation, but they're not taking any responsibility for it. It leads us to a critical truth here. Emotion is not the same as change. We can be emotional in our lives about a sin that we have, but if we don't change, our emotion is useless, right? I mean, we need to change from that. It also highlights human impulsiveness, right? Impulsive buys. Meijer's been really good to this church, but if you go down to the Meijer in Swartz Creek, when you're going to the self-checkout lines, you're herded through this chute like cattle, right? You've got to walk down this little aisle before you can get to the self-checkout line. And all on both sides of that aisle, all the way down, is candy, right? There's candy all over the place, and it's conveniently about this high off the ground, right? So there's candy all along there. You're walking through, you're like, oh, I'm famished from shopping so much, I need a little candy bar. I need a Coke or something like that, right? Those are impulse buys. Just boom, right there, I'm going to make it. Often when we react to impulses or our emotions, we don't seek God. We're acting on our own behalf. And often in these decisions, we regret them later because we didn't seek God. After nearly wiping out the tribe of Benjamin, the Israelites are struck with grief and concern. At the beginning of Judges chapter 21, they gather and they weep and acknowledge that something is deeply wrong, and their concern is genuine. They recognize that losing one of the 12 tribes it'd be a tragedy for the nation of Israel. However, while they're concerned and while it's genuine, it's not guided by wisdom. Instead of seeking God for direction, they again rely on their own reasoning to solve the problem. This leads to solutions that are morally questionable at best, really, and reflects the same broken thinking that got them there in the first place. It shows us that good intentions do not always lead to good outcomes when they're not rooted in God's guidance. The Israelites, they cared about Benjamin, but their methods reveal that the care alone is not enough. They need direction from God. As we will see in the next few verses, they come up with a plan to save the tribe of Benjamin. They came up with a plan, but they didn't ask God. We'll read verses 4 through 12. So it was on the next morning that the people rose early and built an altar there, and they offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. The children of Israel said, "Who is there among all the tribes of Israel who did not come up with the assembly to the Lord?" For they had made a great oath concerning anyone who had not come up to the Lord at Mizpah, saying, "He shall surely be put to death." And the children of Israel grieved for Benjamin, their brother, and said, "One tribe is cut off from Israel today. What shall we do for wives for those who remain, seeing that we have sworn by the Lord that we will not give them our daughters as wives?" And they said, what one is there from the tribes of Israel who did not come up to Mizpah for the Lord? And in fact, no one had come up to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. For when the people were counted, indeed, no one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. So the congregation sent out 12,000 of their most valiant men and commanded them, saying, go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, including the women and the children. And this is the thing that you shall do. You shall utterly destroy every male and every woman who has known a man intimately. So they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man intimately. And they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. So they found what some might call a loophole, right? They can't give their daughters, right, because they swore an oath. But they also, probably rashly, swore another oath that said, whoever doesn't come up here, we're going to kill them all. We're going to take them all out, right? So that's what they did. They sent 12,000 people to Jabesh Gilead, and they destroy it. And they take 400 virgins back to give to the Benjamites. But there's a problem, right? They used violence to fix violence. The Israelites are still doing what they feel is right in their own sight. They didn't go to God, right? They didn't go to God and say, what are we supposed to do for Benjamin now? They said, I got a plan, right? They're not here. So if we kill them, technically they're not giving their daughters to Benjamin, right? So we'll just kill everybody and then take their daughters and give them to Benjamin. They're trying to preserve Benjamin, but in a morally incorrect way. So let's see how that worked out for them. Verses 13 through 18. Then the whole congregation sent word to the children of Benjamin who were at the rock of Rimnon, and announced peace to them. So Benjamin came back at that time, and they gave them the women who they had saved alive. They gave them the women whom they had saved alive of the women of Jabesh Gilead, and yet they had not found enough for them. For the people grieved for Benjamin, because the Lord had made a void in the tribes of Benjamin. Then the elders of the congregation said, what shall we do for wives for those who remain, since the women of Benjamin have been destroyed? And they said, there must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, that the tribe may not be destroyed from Israel. However, we can't give them wives from our daughters. For the children of Israel have sworn an oath, saying, cursed be the one who gives a wife to Benjamin. Again, they show concern for Benjamin, but it also highlights their flawed decision making.
That's basically they're doing work without faith, so it's dead anyways.
Okay, they're doing works without faith, which ends up nothing, right? It's dead. They didn't ask God, right? So they've destroyed yet another city. The Bible doesn't tell us how many people, how many women and men they killed. And they took or stole 400 young women, but still not enough. Do we remember how many valiant men of the tribe of Benjamin were saved or escaped? Do you remember how many? 600, right? 600 of them went out and escaped. So they got 400 young women, 2/3, right? But there's still 200. The Israelites repeatedly act based on what seems right to them. They make vows without thinking, they carry out extreme actions, and attempt to solve problems through their own logic. This kind of reflects the larger theme of Judges, doesn't it? When people rely on themselves instead of relying on God, they tend to drift into chaos. Say that one more time, sorry.
We see that today in our own country.
Absolutely, we do.
Same kind of stuff.
Yeah, we see that today, and we're actually going to talk about that here in just a little bit. But even in the chaos, God's ultimate plan is not undone, right? God's able to work through imperfect people to accomplish His will. The imperfect people in Judges 21 realized their plan was only partially successful, right? So they come up with plan B. You think they fall on their knees? You think they go to God and say, God, how do we get 200 more young women? How do we help preserve the tribe of Benjamin? You're going to say no? All right, let's see what happens. We'll read 19 through 23. Then they said, in fact, there's a yearly feast of the Lord in Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem and south of Lebonah. Therefore, they instructed the children of Benjamin, saying, go, lie in wait in the vineyards, and watch. And just when the daughters of Shiloh come out to perform their dances, then come out of the vineyards, every man catch a wife for himself from the daughters of Shiloh, then go to the land of Benjamin. Then it shall be, when their fathers or their brothers come to us to complain, that we will say to them, be kind to them for our sakes, because we did not take a wife for any of them in the war. For it is not as though you were given the women, it is not as though you have given the women to them at this time, making yourselves guilty of your oath. And the children of Benjamin did so. They took wives for their number, for those who had danced, whom they had caught. Then they went and returned to their inheritance and rebuilt the cities and dwelt in them. So there were not enough young women, so they came up with another workaround. They tell the Benjamites to go and abduct women during a festival, during the feast of the Lord in Shiloh. What kind of garbage is that, right? I mean, what are they thinking? I'm reading this going...
You're desecrating a sacred thing to God.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the cycle that we've seen throughout the entire book of Judges, right? His people turn from God. There's moral compromise. Problems come up. And they go and they cry to God and say, please help us. Only this time they don't. They don't cry out to God and say, please help us. They come up with their own plan. Own plans, because it's not working out, right? They're trying to preserve the tribe of Benjamin, you know, the way God intended. God intended there to be 12 tribes. They're trying to preserve that, but they're doing it in a way that reflects human thought, right? The survival of Benjamin is one of the clearest signs that God's hand is still at work in this chapter. From our perspective, or an outsider's perspective, Benjamin should have disappeared entirely, right? It's the way it looked like it was going to happen. The damage, it had already been done. The cities had already been destroyed. People were killed, and only a small group of men had remained. Yet by the end of the chapter, the tribe has a path forward. It has a future. Now, the preservation of Benjamin's significant, not just historically, but spiritually, right? Benjamin continues to play a role in Israel's story. Later in Scripture, there's some important figures that come from the tribe of Benjamin. Does anybody know who they are? Close. King Saul, just before David, right? So in 1 Samuel chapter 9 verses, 1 Samuel chapter 9 verses 1 and 2, it says, there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zeor, the son of Bechereth, and the son of Apeth, a Benjamite, a mighty man of power. And he had a choice, handsome son, whose name was Saul. There was not a more handsome person than he among the children of Israel. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. Who else came from the tribe of Benjamin?
Apostle Paul.
Right. Very good. I think somebody else had said that as well. So Philippians 3, 4 through 6, Paul says, though I might have confidence in the flesh, if anyone else thinks he may have confidence in the flesh, I more so. Circumcised on the 8th day, the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, concerning the law and a Pharisee, concerning zeal, persecuting the church, concerning righteousness, which in the law is blameless. It looked like the end of the Benjamites at the end of chapter 20, right? But that was not part of God's plan, showing us that God can preserve what even seems lost. Even when situations are out of control, God can provide a way forward. The Israelites' actions, they were flawed, but throughout we see God's unfailing love for his people. The text doesn't show God commanding any of the actions in chapter 21. It doesn't show any time that they went and asked the Lord. They came before the Lord and they cried and wept, but unlike previous chapters, they didn't inquire of the Lord. We see that God's mercy is not dependent on human perfection, right? There was only one perfect human. God's plan is not dependent on us, thankfully. We are dependent on God's plan. Look at the final verse. Everyone did right in his own eyes. This is the summary of the entire book of Judges, right? They all did right in their own eyes. This is the root problem, turning away from God to do our own thing, right? Not being submissive to God leads to moral relativism. I don't know if you can read that or not. Moral relativism is the view that moral judgments are not objectively true or false, but rather relative to culture, social, or personal standards. It asserts that no single moral code is universally superior, and actions are considered right or wrong based on the norms of a specific group. Yeah. And just like you were saying, this is what we're still dealing with this today, right? People define truth for themselves. We look at transgenderism, we look at homosexuality, adultery, lying. We've only got, maybe 40, 50 people sitting here this morning. Why is that? Some of it is because people want truth that fits their lifestyle.
They want it all apart instead of the true food.
Right. Yep, they're not looking for the true food. They want what they want. Without a clear submission to God's authority, people rely on their own judgment. That often leads to disaster. And this is not just it's not an ancient problem, it's still a human problem that exists today. In 2005, Carrie Underwood had a song debuted in 2005 called Jesus Take the Wheel. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, right? How often have we thought, prayed, Jesus, take the wheel, right? I need your help. Just to snatch it back like 3 minutes later because you haven't seen any action take place yet. So give it back to me because I'll do it myself. I'll do it my own way. Still happening today. God's mercy is not seen in their methods, but it's seen in the outcome despite their methods. While this human decision-making has failed, God's mercy remained. This points us to a deeper truth, the guidance. We need guidance beyond ourselves. Left alone, we all make mistakes, just as the Israelites did. But God provides direction, wisdom, and ultimately a path to restoration. This message we can take from this is not just that people fail. It's that God provides a way forward despite that failure. And this is where hope is really found. Just like Israel, we make emotional actions, right? We react emotionally. Oftentimes we have short-term thinking, and it compounds our mistakes. You know, if you think back on the rogue Levite in chapter 19 and 20, right? He should not have even had a concubine. Shouldn't have even had one. God created a man and a woman, right? God created a relationship to be a monogamous relationship, right? But he didn't follow that. Then instead of taking responsibility, he lied by omission, right? He left out a little part, didn't he? He left out the part that he pushed her out the door. What were you going to say?
He took a woman that wasn't preordained by God, and he then tried to, he just sacrificed her to protect himself.
To save himself, right. He sacrificed her to protect himself, right. He never should have had her, right. That led to a civil war within the nation of Israel, right. Now the decisions that we make, the poor choices that we make likely don't start a civil war within a nation, but they can certainly have detrimental consequences to our lives, to our families, marriages, and everything like that. How often do our solutions make more problems for ourselves? I know I've been there several times. Trying to fix an issue without God leads to deeper issues.
Mm-hmm. Continue to try and do things their own self. It's not much different than us today, though. The whole theme around there is no absolutes. That's a saying that's out there. Everybody kind of looks at it. There is an absolute. It's God's word, right?
Right.
People that fall away from that and that thinking process are always going to try and do what's right in their own eyes, as we were seeing here.
Yep.
And it just continues to happen over and over and over again.
Yep.
And we're no different than they are, honestly. We do the same thing, right? And that's the thing that sometimes I think, well, we wouldn't have done that. Well, we do that every day.
Right, right. Yeah, we're just as guilty a lot of times of doing the exact same thing, right? Mercy does not remove the need for obedience, right? We still have to obey God. God provides mercy to those that obey him and that follow him. All throughout the book of Judges, we see God's people cry out to him, and he sends a judge or a deliverer, like you were just talking. The last chapter is different, though. We never read of the Benjamites. We never hear of the Benjamites crying out for God. Not one time do they cry out in chapter 21 and say, help us. Not recorded. Nor do we see any of the other tribes asking for direction on how to fix that issue.
It was the constant saying, and everyone did right in their own eyes.
Right.
I think the whole book of Judges.
Yeah, they did what was right in their own eyes. They didn't even consider God's will, right? They said, we can do it ourselves. We can fix it ourselves. God's promises continued. His divine plan will not be destroyed, not by human hands, not by us, right? God's mercy is available, not because we deserve it, but because he is faithful. He's faithful to us. Which kind of leads us into next week's lesson. Now, Josh is going to teach next week, and he's going to start up in Matthew. So that'll be a refreshing series of classes after Judges. So. Yes. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Oh, go ahead.
I want to tell you that I haven't been giving things over to God for a long time, and this chapter 21 of Judges really made me think I'm going to have to way more
Yep.
than I do.
Yep.
Because I'm like them in a way, like what happened to them.
I'll,
Because only God can solve our problems. We can't do it alone, you know.
right. I mean, that's one of the issues that I struggle with because I'm the man of the family, right? It's my responsibility to take care of my family. And sometimes I try to interject myself to take care of a situation thinking that I can do it my own, you know. It's same thing with all of us. Thank you.